Hello. Welcome to our July conversation of women and blended families. My name is Gayla Grace. I serve on the Family Life blended team, and our ministry is all about serving blended families. Today, the focus of our conversation is on connecting with kids who have walked through divorce as stepmoms and biological moms, how we can help our kids. How do we better understand their behavior and help them sort through their emotions when they've been through divorce and then adjust to a step family? Now, if you haven't joined us before, we are live the second Tuesday of every month at 3 p.m. Central on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube on the Family Life Blended page. And we have a different guest each month with a different topic. And as we wait for ladies to join us, I just want to remind you we do take questions. And if you have questions specifically for our guest on the topic that we have today, be sure to put them in the comments and we will take questions as we can. Those that we don't get a chance to answer, then we will answer after the live stream. So you will still see answers in those comments. So be sure to feel free to put some questions up and then also tag a friend. Maybe you know someone who could benefit from this conversation. And even if they can't watch it now, they can watch it later. There is a recorded version. So be sure that you tag a friend so that they can watch it later. All right, I want to introduce our guest. I'm so excited to have Lauren Wrightsema joining us. Lauren's interest in relationship skills began when her parents divorced after almost 20 years of marriage. And as a result of that, she began to seek to understand patterns for her future legacy. She is a speaker and she's the author of 2 books. One of those we're going to talk about today, In Their Shoes. It's a book dedicated to helping parents better understand and connect with children of divorce. I love this book, y'all. We are going to talk about it. She's got some great stories in there, and we are going to talk about all that. But Lauren and her husband are Colorado natives. They love adventuring with their 3 kids. So welcome, Lauren. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. You said y'all. I just spent some time in Fort Worth, Texas, where I went to college, and so y'all that just was a southern little charm I love to hear.
You'll hear it more than once. It just is part of my vocabulary. It's just part of how we talk when we live in the South.
I love it. You embrace that. That's a part of who you are.
That's right. That's exactly right. Lauren, let's start by you telling us a little bit about your story because I think that'll help our viewers understand really where you're coming from. So, how old were you when your parents divorced? And, was that a surprise? I guess I would be curious to know also.
Great questions. Thanks for asking. Yeah. So our family was a little bit more incremental. It wasn't in learning about the divorce. It started with a separation where my dad moved out of the house for a season and they were going through some pretty intense counseling and really working toward reconciliation. That happened when I was in about 8th grade. And then there was some back and forth and in and out, some mixed messages that ultimately led to a filing when I was a sophomore in high school. So I was definitely on my own, 16, kind of growing up, trying to find my footing as a teenager and also trying to navigate my identity and now blended family, I guess pre-blended family before my parents got remarried. So I'd say it was probably about a 4 to 5 year stretch. And it was, in my case, I know it's not for all people, but it was quite surprising. I felt like I describe it sometimes like we got hit by a truck. We were on a family ski trip. We're avid skiers, and my parents kind of looked a little odd in a conversation they, I guess, had been practicing for us to share the news for a while. And it's that moment that I really remember, just in the emotions of it and the reactions of all my siblings, that it really felt like, wow, our life is about to change and I don't fully know why, but apparently our parents are going to tell us. So it was definitely a moment that I reflect on and remember, and one that has translated in a lot of different ways profoundly for my life, but mostly I would say from an optimistic and hopeful place that I'm very far from that moment as an adult myself, and know that there is a lot of hope and goodness on the other side, no matter how heavy that conversation might feel. So I say that just because I know those that might be listening or tuning in with us right now actually are feeling like, I don't want my kids to be affected, and they're trying to find a way around it, and just they absolutely will be affected, and there are ways that they will find their footing, and it will happen over time, and it will be full of a lot of grief and growth, but it's not the end of you or the end of them when it comes to development and goodness in their life and their trajectory.
Yeah, I love how you put that hope in there because the truth is, if we read the statistics about the ramifications of divorce, it's harsh. And
Yes,
I can tell you with my own kids, I went through some of that after my divorce. So I appreciate your kind of interjecting in there, that it's not the end all, and that's why we are doing this, is to try to help parents and step parents know how to help their kids. But both of your parents now have remarried, right? So did your dad
correct.
remarry first?
My dad remarried first, and it was quite quickly. He was remarried within a year of the divorce. And my mom waited another 5 or 6 years or so. And I think my mom and stepdad just celebrated their 20th, no, anniversary. Yes. It's been that long. Oh my goodness. But yes, so my mom got remarried when I was later on in college, on my college trajectory, and my dad was remarried when I was still in the house.
Okay, so pretty quickly. So that would have been another adjustment then. You're still hurling from the divorce, and now you're thrown into a new family when your dad remarried. So I'm curious, Lauren, when you wrote In Their Shoes, what was your motivation behind that? What was your goal in writing that?
Well, it's actually kind of a fun story. It connects to family life a lot because Ron Deal and I were actually attending a conference for relationship skills training together, representing different agencies years ago. And we had one of those meet and greet things where everyone was networking and kind of talking about their mission and vision. And he introduced himself, and I had sat through his blended family structure narrative, and I was so enthralled as a now adult who'd walked through divorce as a child and who
Mm-hmm.
wanted to prevent divorce in my future. And I just said, I have this dream of telling the kids' perspective, because when I was in counseling, they always talked about how you're supposed to act and what your parents might say. And then I would ask a question, well, have your parents been divorced? And they would say no. And I'd say, well, then what do you, and so I just felt like there's very few firsthand accounts that
Mm-hmm.
actually walk through this narrative. And I'd been mentoring a lot of young adults and parents in that season of my life, just giving friendly advice at a coffee shop here and there. And
Mm-hmm.
I had these themes that kept bubbling up. And what I shared seemed to actually make an impact and matter. And so it was actually Ron who prompted me and said, you should write a book. And I said, are you kidding me? I'm pregnant. I'm not, I mean, I was a great writer in college. I got A's on my papers, but I don't have time I didn't know what to do. And so, but I just took a prompting, and I had all my notes and themes of things and it was such a beautiful picture of
Mm.
re-entering and re-engaging. And I remember the writing process being it wasn't almost, it was incredibly emotional, because I felt like to be authentic on the pages, I needed to feel
Oh,
authentically a version of myself that I'd walked through a little bit more healing at that point in time. And so
right.
it was I had to do it incrementally, because
Mm.
I was experiencing the shoes that I was wearing at 16, even though I was late into my 20s at the time, 30s when this came out. So uh, I'd say it was because it didn't exist for my parents, and I wanted a voice, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't feel like anyone understood me. And so I
Right.
thought maybe my experience isn't so unique, and we could help here.
Yeah, written from the perspective of a child, I think is really good. I mean, just to, like you said, give a voice to the feelings and the things you went through. And you talk a lot about the challenges of adjusting to the divorce, and then the new relationships with your step parents, and then the lingering effects of divorce well into adulthood. But I want to start by talking about when your dad remarried, since he was first. I'm wondering if that for you, all of a sudden you realized my parents really never are going to get back together. So at that point, you just can no longer deny the finality of divorce, right?
Absolutely. It's a stake in the ground declaration, and you don't want to go through it twice, right? You don't want your
Right.
parents to have to. So it was very much I call it a tension between wanting your parents to have a second chance at love and truly being happy for them in your core, but not knowing how to manifest that happiness because you don't get a second chance that closes another side of the story. You're always in the middle as a kid. And in order to maintain a life with my dad, I now had to leave room for a new person. And
Right.
at the same time, I felt very protective of my mom. I wanted him to be happy. I understood where his paradigm was coming from, but I was very selfish in my teen years of wanting my own safety and security, which was now being uprooted.
Right.
So there's a lot of real life, real tension, and
Mhm.
trying to navigate that middle ground can be a really confusing experience.
Right. And you know what? We hear a lot from step couples who are dating and then they marry. They'll say, well, everything was great with the stepkids until we married. And
Yes,
then everything changed. And I think that speaks exactly to what you're saying, that it's not, the struggle may not be about the marriage, but it's this finality of divorce and these new family dynamics. It sounds like that's exactly,
absolutely.
yeah, what happens.
Well, and you kind of nailed it on the head when you talked about the change once the marriage happens. That is such common practice in the stories that people share with me,
Mm-hmm.
is that I mean, the kids were in the wedding and we did a proposal with them and they said yes too. And we did
Right.
everything and we were what happened?
Right.
And what happens is that not only does it finally shut the door that there could be reconciliation and your original bio family could be, together, and that parent trap kind of mentality, because it's certainly you don't want to have divorce twice, and so it's a
Right.
very final moment. And secondly, it's a shift of new expectations and norms and patterns, because for so long when you're grieving with a single parent after divorce, you
Mhm.
almost have this like trauma bond together, and then
Yeah.
this new light comes into your kids or your mom or dad's life, who is now stealing the spotlight. And instead of being like, you are my priority and you're now my only, because you're not second to my spouse, you're my first. And now you're still a high priority because my kids will always come first, but I have this person to now embrace and welcome. And then it's practical things like there's someone else in my home, and
Yeah.
they
Yes.
have a different taste palette for what my mom makes for dinner, and they have different decor and different pets. And it's a lot of times people make it very theoretical and psychological, but a lot of it is in the practical changes that
The
you didn't
logistics.
have.
Yeah.
It's almost like, whoa, where did all of these new patterns come from? And I don't know how to live in this ecosystem because it's all brand new and there's no incremental path to get there. It's so final once that
Mhm.
person is in your space forever. And so therein there are some emotional changes that are quite profound once that marriage is certain.
Right. And I would think just the change, just like you reiterated right there about the different things. And some of them seem like they're very small, but when all that stuff adds up, it feels like a lot for a child. And I mean, kids can't process their emotions the same anyway. Being able to put a name to a feeling, I mean, that's hard stuff. So I think it's natural that we can expect our kids, they are struggling with this change.
Sure.
And sometimes we see behavior that we think just needs to be corrected when really we need to be identifying what's the pain that's behind that behavior. And
Yes.
it may just
What's the
be,
central grief moment? And
yes,
then where do we allow margin for grief? And then where do we direct? There are places that can be taken advantage of too, and you can't blame
yes,
the divorce for everything. And
yes.
so it's a challenge to know, okay, what is typical behavior? And I think for my parents, we had four teenagers in the house almost at
Oh,
the same time. And so it's like, what's typical teenage, rebellion and autonomy, and then what's actual like identity crisis of divorce
hmm,
shifting. And
hmm.
and I wouldn't say that we knew until years later kind of how to picture and to decipher the two, but now there's some telling and compelling patterns that I think are helpful resources for people to discover.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your stepmom. You have a lot to say in your book about that relationship, and I think it's really interesting and I think it's helpful for our viewers in particular because sometimes, and I'm a stepmom myself, and I have certainly had times where I took behavior personally. I felt like it was something against me, that I was the target, when really there are so many things you say in your book that oftentimes it really has nothing to do with you as the stepmom. And Lauren, I'm gonna quote a few things because I think this is so telling. But you start by saying, my stepmom is and always has been kind, gracious, generous, and supportive, yet for many years, my responses to her rarely mirrored these virtues. And then you go on and you talk about when you were in college and you learned your stepmom was expecting a baby boy. Tell us about that experience. What did that experience feel like for you?
Well, it's fun to hear. It's fun to hear those words. It's been a minute since I've actually digested that content, and so it's good to. And it's true. The kindness, one of the words that, to this day, I use and other people use to describe my stepmom's countenance is she truly is kind, and she does not have malice in her body, and she really wants to do right by everyone in her life, and she's a genuine human being, and I really appreciate her for
Mm.
that. And I think, and also I know that one of her most desired roles ever was to be a mom. And at that point, she did not have bio kids of her own.
Okay, okay.
And so the news of my brother coming to the fold was the best news in her life. I mean, and any parent, step parent, bio parent, you know that that motherhood role is sacred space, and it's
Right,
really, really meaningful. And
right,
yet I received an, an announcement for this baby in my college PO box, in Fort Worth, Texas. And it wasn't like that. They told me about it before I
right.
received the announcement, but the announcement was I received it, and then I just kind of dismissed it because it was a huge transition for me to think about my dad as a new dad and what this meant for my family dynamic, and at that point, to be really clear, it wasn't about celebrating her or this huge milestone or being gracious or kind or nice. It was about me being in college, me being in grief, me being sad, me being overwhelmed about, wow, what do I do with this?
Right.
How do I make space for a brand new beginning when I don't feel like I've quite come to the end of my process? And so I actually didn't do anything. I didn't respond to it. I didn't reject it. I just was quiet. But I think that quiet was so painful for my
Mm,
stepmom because
right.
she's like, how would you not? I don't, I mean, how would you not just jump for joy and celebrate with me here? This is a huge thing. But first of all, I'd never been a mom before. I mean,
Right.
it's a selfish season of your life. It's a brand new trajectory for my life. And so I I know that I caused a lot of pain, but it wasn't motivated in trying to create an enemy or to
Mhm.
not get there eventually, but I wasn't ready to be there right then.
Right.
And I and then I felt villainized for how I didn't respond. And so, I think a lot of step kids tell me there's nothing you can do right because if you're too effusive, then you're not sincere. And if you're too standoffish, then you're a jerk. And if you send a present for one holiday, but you forget another one, it's just there's so many things to keep track of
Right.
for an adult brain. And you're dealing with children here. And so I just think looking back on that, I understand retrospectively now how my inaction was maybe a targeted source of being malicious or trying to be rude.
Mhm.
But if you peel back the layers, it had nothing to do with that and everything to do with my process and my kind of selfish season of life to get what I needed. And I wasn't, I mean, when you're in college, I've never been to a baby shower before, right? And so I don't know what to do. I don't know what to buy. I don't know what to say. And
Right.
maybe had it been like I was in the house or I was out of the house as an older adult at that point, it could have been different, but it was what it was. And I do
And
hope that. they know that it's not intentional.
Well, and that's the other thing I was going to say that I think is so important for stepmoms to hear. So the other thing you write is, and this in regards to this and the way that you handle the new baby was, my motives for treating her negatively had nothing to do with her, but rather everything to do with me. I mean, Lauren, that is such an important point for stepmoms to hear because the truth is there's so many things that our stepkids do that have nothing to do with us and everything to do with them, but we take it personally. And, you go on to say my stepmom's character was acceptable to me, but the role she now played was not. It was her position that
Yes.
threatened acceptance, not the person who she was. That's beautiful.
Well, I'm thankful that that creates some sort of beauty because it didn't feel beautiful in this
No,
process.
I know,
I
but
feel ugly sometimes in how the heart of the narrative can be risky to say because there's just some part of the blending process and that step role that just no matter how well intentioned or how equipped with tools,
Mhm.
there's some ugly moments. And I think releasing those and depersonalizing them and deconstructing the power that they have can
Right.
be a really practical tool for gaining a perspective and also healing because
Mhm.
it is hurtful on both sides. It hurts the kids
It
and
is.
it hurts the step parent. And I
Right.
don't think either of those things are fair, but both often are true.
Right. And if we can keep it in perspective, I think it can really make such a difference. So we've had a question come in I want to read and let you respond to. So this gal says, I know my 15-year-old stepdaughter is having a hard time adjusting to having a stepmom. What can I do to help her?
That's such a good open-ended question. Well, I think one, I would say embrace the struggle and give her space to validate that she's having a hard time because it's hard time.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people say, like they want to have an easy time, but it's not an easy time. Blending a
Hmm.
family is hard.
Right.
And I would also remind yourself that what you just talked about, Gayla, and highlighting that the position over the person,
Right.
that I would be leery of trying to manifest behaviors or patterns that are taking a lot of energy from you and then creating very little deposits from her.
Hmm.
And again, find whatever you can, especially since she's 15. She's about to enter the most autonomy seeking season of her teenage years,
Right.
which not only distances herself from you as a step parent, but from her bio mom and her dad and her teachers and every adult in her life. She's going to go more toward friends, more toward peers. And so recognize that that's also an organic part of where she is because you said she was 15.
Hmm.
And with that as a starting line, maybe consider, okay, where are the deposits that are good? Write those down, repeat themselves over and over, even if it's just one time, until there's a secondary, third, fourth one, and know that your patience and your incremental posture will pay off more than a struggle to try and force it.
Right, exactly. And you kind of end that section in your book by saying you cannot refuse forever someone who loves you well. That's a great ending to just help us remember. Don't grow weary of doing good, for at the proper time you will reap a harvest. If you don't grow up, it's in the if you don't give up. Scripture tells us that, and I feel like that's exactly what you're saying. So, love that question, ladies. If you have additional questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we will continue to answer those. But Lauren, you go on. You talk about lingering effects of blended families. 11 years after your parents' divorce, you tell a story about a stolen first. And I'm going to let you explain this. I had never heard that term stolen first. I think it's applicable. But it's a story about when you were pregnant with your first child, and there's a big family celebration, and there was a situation that happened that was hurtful for you. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so it was Thanksgiving, and I was at my mom and stepdad's house, which we were celebrating, and I was pregnant with my very first. She's now 14, so this was a while ago. And then my sister-in-law was also pregnant with her first. And we knew that we were both, I actually didn't know the gender yet, but we ended up both having baby girls 2 weeks apart in May.
Aw.
And we were elated because for both my brother and myself, this was our first grandbaby coming into the picture. So my stepdad actually is a little bit older than my mom and had 3 children who reached those milestones of marriage and parenting before we did. And so he was elated that his family tree was going to grow
Yes.
and that he had one arm around me and one arm around my sister-in-law. And he was kind of parading us around with this jovial, beautiful, welcoming gestures. And some of his speech, I don't remember it verbatim, but the theme was like, I can't wait for grandbabies 5 and 6. It's going to be so fun. Can you imagine grandbabies 5 and 6 running around the tables? And I just like, our family is growing and this is the best thing. We're so thankful. And, it's Thanksgiving. So we're so grateful. And all of it was beautiful and it was sincere and it was meaningful. And he was accepting of these children as his own. And then we get into the car and I was leaving with my husband and I immediately burst into tears. And I had this really profound why. And Josh said, what's up, Lauren? What's happening? And I just said, Josh, this is number one. This is grandbaby number one. Like that, my mom's marriage stole her right to be a grandparent with this baby.
Yeah.
But she's already a Mimi with the other 5 or 4 at that time in his bio family. And she was trying to be gracious and be a grandparent for them. And she's an amazing role for them. But I was robbed of my first opportunity to be,
right,
to do a shower, to do all those things that you do. And for my mom to be called Mimi before she was called grandma was really, really hard. And I understood it cognitively. I understood it with graciousness. I understood the why, but it still hurt. And it was something that I actually came up with a terminology, stolen firsts, as I was thinking about all of the other firsts that I feel like I'm the oldest girl in my family and I'm the first to get married and the first, but for a blended family, no, now I was like number 3, and birth order things are changing and it wasn't as novel or fresh or exciting. And so I think that it really did leave a profound impact on my heart. And then I needed language to label it. And so that was the language I came up with.
And so how did you deal with that? How did you come to grips with that?
At first, I just silently, held and processed my grief internally with my husband and did my very best to celebrate what was new and what was meaningful, and was more cocooned in our own nuclear family. And then I was able to actually writing this manuscript and presenting it to my step parents, and parents were the first to read it. And this chapter was a profound moment with my stepdad because he was able to come back and thank me for that perspective and recognize that he was actually stirring up emotion that was not intentional.
Yeah.
And we kind of created some new norms about what I have the right to not be second in line for without feeling guilty or selfish or all those things that we often get labeled with.
Yeah. So I love what you're saying is you went back. Now, not everybody's going to have written a book and take it to their step parents to present it, but you went back and presented what this felt like to you to kind of help them understand things that they could do in the future to change this so that these stolen firsts don't have to continue to happen. And sometimes it's just simply awareness.
Yes.
Nobody is trying to do this on purpose. And again, we get caught up in it and we have hurt feelings. And when we come step back, we can think, okay, I mean, we still acknowledge our hurt and your grief over that because it was hard. But then to try to go back and explain it to help prevent from this happening over and over again, I think it's, I think that's huge. So, yeah.
And I think that there are, when you think about your rights as a child, that sounds like a really selfish thing to say, but it's kind of like think of more of the legacy bearing the rights of the coat of armor kind of rights. And I think, there's so much you cling to as a child of divorce in anticipation and hope for your future so that, okay, well, this is really hard right now, But when I'm a parent or when I get married or I'll be able to replicate or share something that's meaningful. And then what happens is it actually gets like it re-injected as another pain point instead of
Right.
something that you had the right to. And so I think when it comes to your rights as a child of divorce, it's important to know that your kids have the right to have hurt feelings. They have the right to voice their opinion. They have the right to set boundaries without
Mhm.
you adding another layer of guilt. And I was able to say, hey, I have the right to celebrate this kid like nobody's business and to not hear about all the grandparenting legacies that you've already done because I get to start over, right? And there are places where the blended family does not have to take authority over every new beginning. And I think that sometimes people feel like it's all or nothing. And there are things like we've created some rights with my bio parents where my step
Mhm.
parents aren't involved. It's just
Mm.
not their right. Even though they're in the marriage and they're a huge part of my family, it's this is my right with like mother-daughter time
Mhm.
or just an escape where no, we don't do this tradition with the full blend. We do this tradition with only our bio. And that's
Yeah.
important. And so I think just giving yourself the right to know that that's not malicious or mean, it's kind of an inherent symbol of milestones that have been robbed.
Yeah, and it's the same thing that we tell step parents when there are younger kids in the home that those kids need one-on-one time with their biological parent. The step parent does not need to be there for everything because they are grieving, they're adjusting to a new family, and sometimes they just need time with their biological parent. So yeah, you're basically saying the same thing. And
Awesome.
then you also talk about the differences that you feel as a stepmom and a biological mom, that it's very normal. I mean, in fact, you say it's noble to embrace all children as your own, but really, we need to give ourselves the freedom and own the fact that it is different. And so I think you recognize that from a stepmom view and a biological mom view. We don't want to come across as being fake or fabricate something that's not there, which might be taken that way from a child. Do you have
Yeah.
anything to add to that?
I would just say, I think that's brilliant. And I think a lot of times you feel like you're failing. At least I've heard, because I've never been a step parent myself. But I've heard that the intention of just really trying to capture like sameness
Mhm.
actually creates more division
Mhm.
than unity. And so one of the things that's very practical in our situation, you heard me say, my mother she earned the right to be grandma, very traditional grandma
Right.
with her biological children's children. But with her step grandchildren, she's Mimi.
Mm.
And that was very intentional. It
Huh.
doesn't mean that she shows up for them less or that she
Mm.
babysits for them less or that she, withholds graciousness and goodness, but they did not merit the right to be called grandma first and
Mm.
or ever. And
Mm.
so they came up with a new name that gave her an ecosystem in which to live that she wasn't feeling stress and worry about every time this child called her grandma when she wasn't yet a bio grandma, and still gave her permission to enter into this role as an invited and necessary part of these kids' lives. And so I would just say, if you have to differentiate traditions or names or budgets for Christmas gifts, it's okay to be practical there. And I think kids will understand because they know there is something a little different here, and it's okay. I actually think it's harder if you try and pretend that it's not different.
Yeah, and I think that's different in every family. I think there are times that the grandma name might be the same across the board. I know in our
Sure.
our family, my mom was a bio grandma and then became a step grandma, and so she already had a name established, and so it was the same all across the board. So I think every family has to kind of wade through that and figure out what feels right. And but I think too, we just want to be sure that we're being fair to
Yes.
our stepkids and our biological kids, so that everybody does get the same treatment. But we've had a good question come in. So a stepmom is asking, I never know how to refer to my stepchildren. Do I call them my kids or do I always refer to them as step? So I'm curious, from your perspective as a stepchild, would you want a step parent calling you this is my daughter, or did it feel like it needed to be, this is my stepdaughter?
In my case, that would have been a really bad miscue from my step parents because I was, like I said, 16,
Yes.
almost 18. I was an adult child by the time that they established partnership with my parent. And so to call me your daughter does not feel sincere. And I am one of my core values is authenticity. And so
Yes.
I will always be, I'll try and be accepting and kind and participate and leave room for you in my life, but you're not going to ever fulfill that role. And so, however, that's my story. And my story was a little farther advanced in my upbringing.
Right.
And
Right.
so I would, if I were maybe 5, 6, maybe 7, those formative years where you actually have a lot more of the parenting habits and you incrementally earn the right to have those vulnerabilities and transparencies, I think that there are cases in which the step kind of feels a little bit like you're short-sighting the role that you play. And
Right.
ultimately, what I would do is I would ask the child
Hmm.
regularly
I agree. Right.
and in different seasons to be able to say, I never expect you to move toward calling me mom or dad. And I actually don't want to call you my son or daughter unless it's something that you desire for me and communicate permission and consent for. And so let's check in on this every few, years, not
Right.
every few months, not every few weeks. Give us
Right.
some time and just say, has anything changed? And I think for example, with in-laws, it's very different than step parenting, but it is like I feel like a daughter to my mother and father-in-law,
Hmm.
I call them mom and dad all the time. And I
Yeah.
actually adopted that very quickly because they treated me and saw me as their own, and I wanted to validate that for them. So
Right.
I have chosen to call my in-laws mom and dad and my bios mom and dad. And so if you reverse that role, I think it just depends on each individual circumstance and the respect in which you deliver the
Hmm.
question, and also surrendering the expectation that it might never happen and being okay with that.
Yes. And I think that's a really good example. I have thought that same thing in regards to our in-laws, our son-in-laws. I have a son-in-law who calls me and my husband mom and dad. And he has his own mom and dad. And
Mhm.
yet it is a term of endearment, I feel like, just because we have good relationships with him. So it's very similar, I feel like, in these step parent roles. And over time, it might develop to where it can move more into how you describe them. But I agree with you. Talk to them about it so that everybody feels comfortable about what the term is, and that's always helpful. One more thing I want to mention, and I'm going to address one more question before we wrap up, is in regards to, you talk about, like, where we talked about your behavior towards your stepmom and that it really had nothing to do with her but her position, but how hurtful that is. And then you also, in the book, Lauren, you talk about how this stepmom position can be so difficult and it can be so draining. And there are times that we feel like we lose our identity, we lose our power. And so one of the questions actually that came in was, I do feel like I've lost my identity as a stepmom. How do I get that back? How do I get that power back? And I'm curious how you would answer that.
So just to clarify, you're looking at the perspective of how do I assert my power as intrinsically as a stepmom
Yes,
when I
I know you've
continue
never been one, but I know you
when I
talked about
continue. Yeah,
this.
I think the ultimate thing is find a new source to root your security and
Hmm.
detach almost all meaning. And that sounds really cold, but I think it's a coping mechanism that's healthy, is come to the table knowing who you are and dismissing any discounted value that comes from a step kid's perspective.
Yeah.
So link up with the most amazing friends, find your tribe of women and just make sure that they speak life and affirmation into you. Being on this call is a part of that. Make sure that you are rooted. If you're somebody who follows the Lord and you are struggling with your role, go to him and make sure you get all of your blessing and all of your affirmation and all of from you being his daughter and not from you being a stepmom.
Right.
Remind yourself that you are in it for the long haul. remind yourself and reject anything that's projected on you that's untrue. And be willing to take ownership of the things that you do. I mean, there are people. I actually got a really bad review from a reader who said, not all step parents are kind and gracious and lovely. And so
Oh,
this isn't a good resource for me. And I was like, you're actually right. Step parents sometimes as a role can be the most cringeworthy for how they treat kids and how
mm,
they, and so I'm guessing none of the people on this call are experiencing that. Because I know that to not, that's other people, but also it's a good self-awareness exercise of where are you actually being a little childish?
right.
Where are you actually
Mhm,
not giving patience and grace? Because it's not always about you either.
mhm,
You're the adult. And so
mhm,
I say that with all genuine kindness because I want your hearts to thrive and feel alive. And when you project that it's the kid as the villain and nothing you can do is right, you're going to be stuck there. But
right.
when you can say, what can we both do as a system of awareness to get closer, go to God, go to community, and
Mm.
then seek some affirmation, if any, from the kids.
Yeah, I agree. Walk with the Lord because truly that's where we need to find the help when we're hurt, when we're discouraged, when we're in a place that we feel confused, and certainly trying to get our needs met from our kids and stepkids is not the place to go. And although we do sometimes, and so that's what we're trying to address here, and how to really look to God as our source. Well, Lauren, I am going to wrap up with a few last words of kind of how you ended your book, because I think this is a good thing for our viewers to remember. But you say, reprogram your blended family label from broken to blessed. We're part of a redemptive story written by a God of second chances. Fight for your marriage. The best is yet to come. And please remember, your stepchildren love you too. Yes, amen.
Oh, that was a good way to end a book.
Well, it was absolutely good words. And thank you for joining us. If our viewers want to find you, where can they go?
So you're welcome to reach out. I have an Instagram and Facebook channel. My Instagram is up there on the screen at Lauren Reitzma. I also respond to email, and that would be just Lauren at myrelationshipcenter.org. Lauren at myrelationshipcenter.org. And yeah, In Their Shoes is a resource. I still am trying to figure out, when and how and why it came to be. And I just believe that this is a piece of the story that sometimes the voice that my parents were looking for didn't exist, and perhaps
Mm,
the voice of children might be a nice tool for you. So I'm just so thankful and grateful to be a part of your stories today, and for you tuning in and having really thoughtful questions. And so my gratitude is sincere, and I would love to be a continued source of hope and inspiration however I can.
absolutely. Thank you, Lauren. We so appreciate you. All
Thank you
right,
for
ladies, make plans to join us next month for our August live stream. It's on August the 13th, and we are going to talk about all things related to back to school. I'm excited to welcome Nan Deal to our conversation. Nan recently retired from teaching. She has 25 years experience in public and private schools, and she has a wealth of knowledge about children and how to help them adjust to home and school routines that are part of back to school. So mark your calendar to join us on August the 13th. Also, registration is open for our Summit on Step Family Ministry. It will take place on October 10th and 11th in Dallas. And this event is geared toward equipping the church to minister to blended families. We bring together leading voices in the field of step family ministry. And we will guide you whether you're just getting started with step family ministry, or you want to grow your ministry, or maybe you know someone who would be interested to attend. You can find all the details at summitonstepfamilies.com. Be sure you're following Family Life Blended on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, and have your notifications turned on so you're notified when we go live. I love having you join me live every month for our conversations. God bless you, ladies. Thank you for joining us today. Psalm 18:25 gives us a promise: to those who are faithful, God shows himself faithful. Keep pressing on, and I'll see you next time.